the U.S. Office of Special Counsel is going to be looking into Jack Smith's probe and prosecution of President Trump in relation to alleged Hatch Act violations. Now, the Hatch Act is U.S. law that prevents government officials from engaging in certain partisan political activity while they are a government official. And a lot of this stems from a referral by Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, and we'll get into that as well. But Jordan, this is now what we're seeing, more oversight in looking back at the actions of the Biden administration in relation to how they weaponized government to go after a political opponent. So we're seeing this, and I just wanted to get, what's your first take hearing this news at the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, which we'll get into later. It's not the same thing as what Jack Smith was, a special counsel under the DOJ. But just your first take when you see this news.
First take is this is necessary for the American people, right? Is that the voters out there, especially conservative voters, but I think overall long-term for our elections in the United States of America, people wanted to see action taken, investigations being done to know if the idea that this was potentially wrongdoing by these individuals, whether it was Jack Smith, appointed just days before President Trump announced that he would be running for re-election. And again, you go from Russia and you look at that matter now being investigated. Now you look at the special counsel's office. It's a bit of a different start to the investigation. But what I think is so important here is for how many years people, ACLJ supporters, listeners to this broadcast, people who watch the broadcast of the show, have been waiting for those who have carried out these actions, which we believe were wrong and potentially illegal in interfering with our elections. When would they be held accountable? When would we even start the investigations? And now, still, I know it's hard to say, still pretty early on into this second Trump administration, we are starting to see the beginning of those investigations. That doesn't mean, and I don't want to put too much weight to say that this means everybody's going to jail, because I think that that's the jump. But I will say this, the difference here is that in the past, when we were investigating these or defending these, as I was part of that legal team for President Trump, when it came down to the Russia information, the Mueller team and all of that, that we did not have prosecutorial power.
Right.
The Trump administration does. The DOJ does ultimately have prosecutorial power. Now, through the special counsel office, it's a two-step process to go there, but they've got plenty of time, even in this one term of President Trump, to do the investigation. And if they believe charges should ultimately be brought into court, they can do so. And that is a big change from where we were just a year ago, where we could say this was wrong, we could have investigations, but ultimately people may be even getting fired, but ultimately it would be more difficult to see actual justice get done. This time around, I think that we actually have a much better chance of seeing people being held accountable.
What we're seeing here is one, already, the Democrats trying to make this about Trump weaponizing independent agencies, which is a whole other rabbit trail we could go down about how the bureaucracy tried to isolate themselves from the president and being able to actually govern the country. But these independent agencies that the Democrats are now saying President Trump is weaponizing. What we need to also let people know, this investigation stems from Senator Tom Cotton asking for an investigation into this. It wasn't President Trump that directed this office to do this investigation. It was a U.S. senator who laid out a very compelling case of why this needs to be looked at. The U.S. Office of Special Counsel isn't a special counsel under the DOJ, which is appointed by the Attorney General to have independence over maybe a politically interesting or dicey kind of investigation that could look like there's some sort of retribution. So they have a special counsel that can be dedicated to that team. This is an office that primarily it investigates things like whistleblower protection. They try to protect whistleblowers, the Hatch Act, which is where there's partisan political activity, and other things regarding really the employment rights of bureaucrats and people within the government.
That's right.
And they also don't have prosecutorial power, Jordan.
No, they have power to seek disciplinary action for federal employees, but they don't have the power to bring those employees or former employees to court, to a traditional court on criminal charges. What they can do is make a referral to the Department of Justice team that can do that. And that's the Department of Justice led by the Attorney General Pam Bondi. So President Trump's choice for Attorney General. So they're in a very different situation right now. So while this is kind of a two-step process, separate from the process looking at Brennan and Comey, which is a one-step process because that's DOJ directly looking at criminal wrongdoing. This would be a 1-2 step. And the reason why here is you first start with the Hatch Act, which prevents federal government officials from taking actions that would impact or try to impact federal elections. And in this matter, what they're saying is when you look at the timeline, when you look at the race to try and bring this to court, when you look at the fact that he's appointed 3 days before, it was, I'm quoting here, Jack Smith's legal actions were nothing more than a tool for the former President Biden and former Vice President Harris campaigns. Isn't just unethical, it could be illegal campaign activity from a public office. That's from Senator Tom Cotton. So that's where I think we need to look at is, one is it a violation of the Hatch Act? That's what the Office of Special Counsel will ultimately come down on. And then they can make a referral if they believe that there was further wrongdoing that can then be investigated as criminal conduct by the Department of Justice. This is so important to me for our election integrity moving forward in our country because, let's just be honest, we're not going to have President Trump again on the ballot. He was unique and is unique in his ability to take this incoming fire from kind of every side possible. So you want to make sure that these bad actors or potential bad actors know that if you try to do this again, there will be serious consequences. And I think that's the big goal for the American people, is that we don't just brush this under the table and say, oh, this was bad, this happened, but we moved on and we actually ended up winning again. So we know this strategy, if it's not stopped now, as something that is very dangerous to take on for those who want to try and utilize it to undermine, typically it would be conservative candidates, people who want to shake up Washington, D.C. And if you look at the current state of the Republican Party right now, the Republican Party is dominated by those kind of individuals, the kind that want to shake up the bureaucracy and shake up Washington, D.C., that you can't employ these kind of strategies without any kind of fear, especially if it's wrong to do so. So fear under the Hatch Act that you could lose your job or face penalties there, and then criminal violations as well, because that is a way really to put an end to this. Again, the lawfare, the politicization of our Justice Department has gone overboard. We can't allow it to continue, and yet I kind of feel, Will, and I'd love to get people's reactions on this at 1-800-684-3110. I feel like this is still a main part of their playbook.
Right.
For not just for Donald Trump, but for whoever comes next, is if they think we can muck you up by bringing charges and using the bureaucracy against you, even during a political time, even during an election year, even when we shouldn't be doing it, and even if we're making it up, and we know what we're saying is not true, and nothing will happen to us, why not use that? I mean, the interesting part of all of this is that ultimately here, what's the big consequence? They went to battle using a system in our government that you are not supposed to use for political purposes, and that is our law enforcement. Law enforcement should never be used for politics. And you know what I just kind of cringe at is that people on the left who are upset that this is being investigated.
Right.
Because do they really want the kind of norm to become that whoever's in charge is going to criminally investigate and potentially prosecute people for meaningless crimes or made-up crimes like we saw with Alvin Bragg in New York because they disagree with their politics or they want to impact the election? If we allow that to happen in the United States, long-term, our system of rule of law falls and then the system of our government falls. And we've talked about that a lot. So it's got bigger implications than just Jack Smith. It's got the criminal investigation has bigger implications than just the intel committee, just the intelligence community like Brennan and of course Comey and others. But they were bragging about leaking documents. all things that if Republicans did, they would be behind bars.
That's right. And we're going to get into some of that as well, because the Russiagate revelations that we've been seeing are shocking, and we've been talking about them here. I want to get your input on them. But another thing to remember is that why do we talk about these things on this broadcast? We talk about them when it's a government action or investigation so that we can make sure people know about this if they want to support their elected representatives in seeking the truth in this manner. But we also fight in the courts. And as a matter of fact, we at the ACLJ just filed an election integrity case last week with an amicus brief going to the Supreme Court. And we are urging the Supreme Court to reverse a dangerous precedent that was set in Illinois. And so a lot of people don't want to be thinking about elections right now. You know, we just got through one. The midterms are still a year and a few months away. So they're kind of like, let's not talk about elections right now. We don't have the luxury to just sit by and wait for elections to come and hope that we can protect our Constitution and our democratic republic. We have to keep fighting. That's what we do here. When you at home may not want to be thinking about the next election, you're like, I don't have to watch ads right now. I'm good. Know that we are still working. That's why we're filing briefs, trying to protect the integrity of our elections, because we know what the attacks of the left have been. We know how they've tried to undermine them, how they've tried to use the government to go after candidates to try and ruin them before an election, to just try to cheat to get above. Just to win, they're going to weaponize the government, as well as pushing an entire narrative, an entire hoax for years about Russia to try and, once someone did get elected, they wouldn't let that individual govern properly because they ensured that they would be being investigated from day one by sending spies into the White House, by getting FISA court orders so they could spy on American citizens.
Imagine trying to do your job.
Right.
Any job. You take out being president of the United States. Think about the job you do or the job you did if you're retired. And imagine that while you're trying to do your job and all the people who rely on you, that the entire time you're doing that, there's entire government agency or, let's say, internal bureaucracy at your company trying to bring you down. And not just bring you down by removing you from your job, because they try to do that through impeachment, but also criminally prosecuting you and putting you behind bars, and you've got to be dealing with the crises at your company. Now imagine you're president of the United States, and you're dealing with the crises of the world, of the U.S. economy, of the world economy, of terrorism, of Islamic radicalism, of all the different wars going on, all the different potential conflicts going on, all the different negotiations that go into that, and you've got that hanging over you. I will tell you, because I was there, most people, the toughest politicians, would fold. President Trump didn't. And not only did he not, he decided, you know what? I'm going to come back. I think this election was a mess, and he made that very clear. But he didn't say, you know what? I don't think I can win again, so I'm just going to step back and retire. He said, you know what? It's worth fighting back to set the record straight. I've got more I want to get done, so I'm willing to do that. And so I think if he's willing to do that, we have to be willing to support these investigations, not for political purposes. It's actually the opposite. It's so that we don't have this in our political system as a norm. We talk about norms in law all the time, Will. This should not become a norm of the American political system, using law enforcement to try and inflict political damage on our ideological opponents.